Hello. So this is a relatively short lecture on Ursula K. Le Guin's story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. It's a relatively short story, kind of a sci-fi fantasy sort of thing, but it really illustrates, I think, utilitarianism and the conflict with deontology and how that conflict deep within all humans. So it's a good segue from utilitarianism into deontology. So in the story, she describes a city, and it's kind of like a almost a perfect city, right? Everyone in the city is happy, or she says at least as happy as humans can ever be, right? Um, so, what does the happiest city possible look like? She does some of the work to help us to envision it, but I think ultimately she wants to sort of leave it open to us, right? And to say, well, whatever for you that city looks like, that's what this will look like, right? She does get into some details. Um, she describes workmen, right? So presumably people are still working, so maybe that's part of being a happy human, as you do some sort of work. She describes women carrying babies, so it doesn't seem like there's been a total, destruction of traditional gender roles or anything like that. Take that however you like. Again, I think her idea is to leave it open, fill in enough of the details that you can imagine it, but if you need to change some of those details, that's fine, right? You've got people riding horses, but it's kind of funny with the horses. They don't wear halters. At one point, she says that the horses adopt our ceremonies as their own, right? So, not sure what that means. Did the horses participate in the religion or have the same religion, or at any rate, the horses seem to have a little bit more human-like status than they do for us. And clean air, green meadows, so it doesn't seem not polluted or overdeveloped or overpopulated like that. There are some odd components of it. She says the people don't smile. I'll be honest with you, I can't explain every part of it. That's what makes it literature and not philosophy, and what makes it sort of, in some ways, more interesting and more engaging. Um, so, feel free to think for yourself, why wouldn't these people be smiling? There's no kings, no slaves, no swords, right? So um, it doesn't look like the happiness is somehow enforced or guaranteed by some hierarchy or by violence or anything like that. Um, she describes this society as less sophisticated than ours, but insists they're not less intelligent, right? So they don't quite have the same sort of like skyscrapers and all the technology that we have, but it's not for lack of intelligence. It's apparently a deliberate choice. She doesn't really talk about the details of their legal system. Again, I don't think that's the point. The point is just to set the stage of like, here is a perfectly happy or as happy as possible society. She says the happiness seems to stem from an understanding of life, the nature of life, what is necessary for happiness, right? So they don't have all the technology, but that's because that maybe doesn't make you happy. And then she says, but if you want trains, okay, yeah, there's trains, right? Uh, if this sort of life is too boring, you can add orgies and drugs. Maybe that's the perfectly happy society, right? Um, she says it's up to you, right? She does specifically say there's no guilt, right? Um, and there is a religion, but no clergy, right? So no priests. So again, I guess no hierarchy, right? But some sort of spiritual thing going on. So she zooms in on a particular scene. There's a summer festival going on. This is, I don't know if you've seen the movie Midsummer, right? That's what this photo is from. It's not exactly a perfectly happy society. It's a deeply creepy one. But at any rate, yeah, there's a sort of a summer festival going on. Everyone's participating in their own way. And again, she doesn't really get into the details. Uh, she does sort of spend a lot of time sort of puzzling over, well, what would sex look like in this society? Doesn't really land on anything exact. Um, so in essence, she's trying to leave the details open, but say, here's the idea: we've got a happy society, right? Think a utilitarian society, right? This would be the goal of utilitarianism, right? But she says there's a catch, right? So now she gets into describing this one very specific part of the society. In the basement of one of the buildings, a windowless room with a single locked door. And she says it has a dirt floor, a few old mops, it's about the size of a jail cell. And in this room is a young child. She says he looks about 6, but he's probably more like 10 and just sort of underdeveloped, undernourished. Describes him as feeble-minded, either from birth or maybe through neglect, right? Who knows how long he's been in this room, right? That might affect anyone's mind. The kid is afraid of the moms, right? So he's kind of sitting huddled in the corner, sort of like in constant anxiety and terror. And then at random intervals, someone opens the door and gives the child a daily half bowl of cornmeal and some water, right? What the heck is going on? Right? There's this perfect society, and yet there's this little bit of horror going on, right, in a basement somewhere. So when the person arrives to give the food to the child, they never speak. Sometimes the child will beg to be freed, but the person giving the food never answers, right? She gets more into the details. It's even more horrifying in the story, right? I won't. I don't even want to necessarily talk about it, but you get the idea, right? The child is clearly deliberately imprisoned, and their life is nothing but clearly a horror. So what the heck is going on, right? Why? Well, she says it's a society without guilt, right? And then there is, in some unexplained way, uh, happiness of the people of Omelas depends on this child being imprisoned, right? Um, and so everyone sort of understands this, or they have it explained to them when they reach a certain age, right? Um, if you want to go see the child, you're allowed to, right? Some people would rather not see. Um, when you have it explained to you as a teen, some people are like, what? Shocked and they want to know more, want to go see it. Other people are like, okay, and manage to go on with their lives, right? Um, but it's pretty much guaranteed anyone who does choose to see the child is shocked and disgusted. It's a horrifying situation with anyone with abilities, right? Um, right? All these people, these in this perfect society, are humans with normal human emotions. They see a child suffering and they want to help, right? But on some deep level, they also know they can't, right? And again, this is not explained except that the happiness of society depends on the child, right? Somehow, to save the child would end the happiness of Omelas by somehow introducing guilt, right? This deep connection between the guilt and the happiness in the child is not entirely explained. It's suggestive, interesting, um, but I don't know that I can completely. So what do people do, right? So, they reach age, this is explained to them. Sometimes people go see it. After they see it, they're shocked. Maybe people continue to be disturbed for some time after, sometimes for weeks, right? They might sit there and brood about the injustice of it all. Um, Most of the time, people come to some resolution. They're able to uh, make the conflict settle down in their heads. Maybe they say, look, at this point, the child couldn't be reintegrated into society anyway. The child was too far gone. Um, and the knowledge of the truth of this possibility and existence of suffering, something about either the contrast or whatever, makes them appreciate their own happiness and the happiness of society even more. It gives depth to their art, right? You can imagine just people that are just feeling pleasure and happiness all the time. Like, what kind of art would they produce? They need some knowledge of the range of suffering. It makes them more sensitive and caring towards their own children. And in the end, most people, right, in Omelas conclude, well, you can't have the good without the bad, and it's a shame for that kid, but on the whole, things are fine. And the utilitarian, right, approach. But not everyone has this reaction, right? Every once in a while, right, a youth who is told about the situation goes to see the child, is horrified, and does not go home and kind of brood over it for a while and rationalize it and sort of make sense of it in their own head. Instead, they don't go back to Omelas ever, right? After seeing the child, they immediately leave. They just start walking, right? They don't always go the same direction. Sometimes they go towards the mountains, sometimes go towards the plains, but they leave Omelas and they never return. Um, we don't know where they're going, she says, but they seem to know. That's it. That's the story, right? There's not exactly a plot, right? It just draws this picture, this happy society with this dark underbelly, and two sorts of reactions that people have to it, right? And I mean, the two types of people, right, after seeing this child, sort of reflect two approaches to ethics, right? The ones that can rationalize it and say, well, this is a terrible thing, but think of all the good it produces. There's sort of a utilitarian approach, right? But it's not the only kind of approach that you could have. not all humans are like that, and most of us are a bit of both. Many of us would say, sorry, had to pause it there for a second. Um, so yeah, we have the consequentialist approach, but then we also have this deontological approach that says, look, some things cannot be done ever, right? Some things are just deal breakers, no matter how much happiness they produce. And some people, one of those things would be torturing a child, an innocent child in a basement, right? Who cares if it makes the entire world happy? You just can't do it, right? And, you know, both of those tug at us, that tug at our brain, right? Well, yeah, we want to make everybody happy. If there's a little sacrifice to be made, it seems like it could be worth it. But then again, some sacrifices seem like much, right? So, I mean, a few questions you might have for discussion if you want to think about this further. She's attempting to describe a perfect society. Did she miss something, right? Or is there anything importantly wrong about her description, right, that you would add? What does this mean about the guilt, the lack of guilt, and how, right, freeing the child would introduce guilt? What is that? What is that relation to happiness? It's certainly not in any of our philosophical theories, but she's a very clever and philosophically informed writer. She must have been deliberate about that. Is there any sort of metaphor for our own society hidden in this story, right? You might think, geez, these Omelas people, I would never do that, right? But, well, children suffering in our world, right? Are any of us wearing clothes that might have been made by children on the other side of the world in similar conditions to that child, right? I mean, sweatshops exist, and you know, uh, many of the clothes at Target or whatever, our cheap clothes aren't cheap for no reason, right? They're cheap because there's suffering involved, right? So, maybe there's some connection to our society, right? Maybe we're not so much better than the people from Omelas. And, you can think about yourself. Which would you choose, right? Would you stay in Omelas, or would you be one of those ones that walks away? So, hopefully a little short and fun little reading and lecture, and then we're going to pick up on deontology now.